The blind man woke up to a strange discovery. He, who had been blind for 20 years, could see again. He carefully examined himself in front of the mirror. At that moment, his wife hurried over upon hearing him, but when he looked at his aging wife, Jeff's heart was filled with disdain. Yet he didn't show it. Instead, he pretended to be happy with her. The two of them, overjoyed, immediately rushed to the hospital. After a thorough checkup, the doctor was also greatly shocked. The cyst pressing on Jeff's eye had strangely disappeared, allowing him to regain his sight overnight. But unfortunately, there was still a chance of it recurring. Once back home, Jeff gradually got used to the light. However, when faced with everything within reach, he felt a little out of place. Meanwhile, his wife, who usually didn't care for her appearance, had already changed into a beautiful new outfit, even putting on bright red lipstick to look sexier. She planned to rest at home all day, to celebrate Jeff's regained sight, but Jeff seemed unusually indifferent. He politely declined his wife. Then, using his senses in trial and error, he went to visit his son at school. After sharing his joy with his son, he saw his son's beaten face. That's when he realized his son had been bullied for years. That evening, his wife took him to the community. Although he had visited many times before, he had never experienced what it felt like to witness everything. Jeff was unexpectedly grateful for this good fortune. Looking at his wife, who had put in so many years of effort, he vowed to repay her properly. His wife, however, was very content with their life. She believed that as long as the family was safe, that was enough. The next day, with the help of his blind friend, Jeff found a job at a real estate company. Seeing his colleagues in suits, Jeff felt a mix of emotions. He realized what he had lost over the years. Not long after, the family went on a trip. While his wife and son were sleeping, Jeff quietly got himself ready. He wore a fine suit and went to a bar in the resort area. He was filled with curiosity about everything. Watching the couples under the lights, Jeff made an advance toward a girl nearby. Though he knew his family was upstairs, he couldn't resist. He invited her to dance. This was an experience he'd never had before. The next day, back home, he decided to start fresh. The Braille label on the jar, the alarm clock that woke him up early, even the door handle he had touched countless times. He no longer needed any of it. He decided to embrace a new life. The next day, he went to work as usual, but the perfume on his female colleague attracted him deeply. However, Jeff was still a small fry at the company. When passing by the boss's office, he saw that same female colleague again, but he understood his position. A strong feeling of inferiority welled up inside him. Jeff knew he had to change, so he stole all his wife's bank cards and bought expensive new clothes. When passing by a gym on the street, he knew he needed a good body too. After all, that's what would complement the sharp suit. Not long after, the increasingly confident Jeff was soon promoted by his boss, but he went to catch up with his blind friend. His words clearly revealed his sense of superiority. Looking at his still blind friend, he held himself as someone superior, completely treating himself as a different person. Back home, he told his wife a surprise. The car outside was the one he had just earned. Jeff had a smug look on his face, but his wife was deeply worried. She knew Jeff had just gotten his driver's license, and he could be in danger. But Jeff didn't appreciate her concern. Instead, he thought she was underestimating him, and even felt she might be a control freak. After all, he had once struggled just to walk, so the two parted on bad terms. The next day, Jeff and his son went to the principal's office to accuse him of not intervening when his son was bullied. He threatened the principal with exposing the incident. After solving all his son's problems, his son looked at him with admiration, and Jeff became even more reckless. He took his son out to skip class, and even suggested transferring him to a better school. But luckily, his son, being sensible, didn't want to add any burden to the family. When his wife found out about this, she scolded Jeff for not considering the child's future, and this sparked a conflict between them. But fortunately, Jeff's career was thriving. To help him do better, his boss even arranged for the female colleague to be his assistant. Looking at the woman who had once been out of his reach, Jeff's heart was already in turmoil. But looking at his wife at home, he no longer felt any interest. Meanwhile, his wife tried hard to salvage their relationship, taking him to the community they often visited to dance. But Jeff didn't want to face it. His mind was full of thoughts of that female assistant. Their relationship continued to decline. On the other hand, Jeff's career was soaring. He suggested a major change for the company, shifting from phone services to face-to-face services, and this plan was successfully adopted by his boss. The assistant was also drawn to his talents. Their feelings seemed to be on the verge of exploding, until the day of the company's party. Jeff's gaze never left the assistant, and in that instant, the assistant glanced back. It seemed the two had already decided on each other. Back home that night, Jeff was exhausted, but his wife had been waiting for him all night. She didn't understand what had happened to Jeff. All she knew was that the husband she knew was now a stranger. Then Jeff asked a fatal question.
Why me? Why did you...
Was it because I was pitiful in the crowd? After all, I was just a blind man back then. Hearing this, his wife fell silent. She knew their marriage had reached its end. The two returned to the community where they first met, but the familiar music no longer moved them. The two peacefully divorced. Not long after, Jeff successfully got together with his assistant. They walked hand in hand through the flower fields. At this moment, his life had reached its peak. He even easily acquired a villa. All his past wishes were now fulfilled. He even used his blind friend's status to successfully convince the community manager to organize a real estate seminar for him. With his exceptional speaking skills, he achieved outstanding results for the company. But his friend, standing nearby, was deeply worried. The two met at a restaurant to talk. The friend questioned why Jeff had abandoned his wife, knowing that she had sacrificed over 10 years for him. But Jeff was indifferent. He believed that everything he had now was hard-earned, and that his friend was just jealous. Jealous that he had regained his sight. Jealous that his life was better than his friend's. When leaving, he even mocked his blind friend for being unable to see. Jeff seemed to have truly become a man above others. But that day, his boss suddenly approached him, holding up a flyer collected from the streets. It exposed all his schemes. Jeff immediately knew who had sabotaged his speech. He rushed to his friend's house and slammed the thick stack of flyers in his face, accusing his friend of betraying him. But his friend believed it was wrong to deceive blind people, and so, the two ended their friendship. Jeff, as usual, went to the gym, and then decided to move forward alone. He continued his rambling speech, but now, he was all alone. At the same time, he learned from his son that his wife had been working out every day after their divorce. She hadn't let herself fall into despair. Feeling physically and mentally exhausted, he went to visit her, but she was acting strangely distant, and didn't invite him to stay for dinner. Maybe it was because her sense of loss had finally eased. For a while, he often stood outside her door, until he heard his son say his mother had gone to the community. He rushed to the familiar place, only to find his wife talking happily with his friend. Jeff knew he couldn't stop it anymore, but still, he pushed his friend away, and made him leave. The two began dancing the familiar dance again. His wife told him that she had no relationship with his friend, but no matter what, she and Jeff had reached the end of their journey. Back home, Jeff woke up to find his sight was gradually becoming blurry, and the feeling grew stronger. He immediately went to the hospital, but the doctor couldn't find anything wrong. At that point, he still insisted on going to work, but faced with the sudden blurriness, Jeff could only flee in panic. He thought things might get better, but the blurriness only worsened. His female assistant also noticed something was wrong. She tried to ask Jeff about his condition, but Jeff understood that if he went blind again, everything would disappear. Back home, he lay on the bed and cried uncontrollably. For most people, not getting something isn't a big deal, but when a person experiences sweetness and then loses it, that becomes a lifetime of pain. When Jeff woke up, he blindly made his way to his friend's house, only to be met with a brutal rejection. "Get back home, go away." He then drove in a daze to his wife's house, seeking comfort, but his eyes could no longer bear it. Yet, relying on his inner hope, he left the car by the roadside, and stumbled back to his wife's house. When his wife saw him, she understood what had happened. But some things are simply missed. She told him to take care of himself, and Jeff, lost in spirit, wandered aimlessly. Finally, he sat down. The familiar darkness returned, and a voice echoed in his ear. "Shoo."